The code switch.
Panashe? Okay, I promise you, by the third episode, it's going to work. It really is going to work this time, okay? You see, this is what we're talking about. We need to bring out all of ourselves each time, right? We've lost episode. We're practicing what we preach here on Vanguard, right? On the code switch.
We need to do this afternoon.
Exactly, yeah. We'll do some lessons, okay? We'll get you, girl. So we're talking about something that a lot of us have been labeled. As black people, as black women, as young black professionals, I think this term gets thrown at us quite often, and it can be quite hurtful, and it can be quite a silencing word. The terrible word, I'm even twitching as I'm saying it, is entitlement. That we are entitled, we want what we shouldn't be wanting yet. And part of why I wanted to talk about this is I read a really interesting article on waitbutwhy.com about the gypsies, which is Generation Y special protagonist yuppies. So globally, there's just, as millennials, we've been taught that we need to be the change we want to see in the world, right? We have everything at our grasp, the opportunities, and our helicopter parents have sort of pushed us into becoming the Mandelas of the world, because it's not only the fact that all of us are going to contribute significantly, a lot of us actually feel that, but me especially, I really am going to be the one who brings a lot more change than a lot of my peers do. So that's at the global level, the millennials, and just the entitlement that we have in terms of what the expectations we have of ourselves and the expectations our parents have of us. There's also, on the other hand, in South Africa, entitlement that's brought on, or expectation that's brought on by the promise of freedom. 94 no longer is it codified that I don't have XYZ opportunities. It is legislated that I actually get everything that everybody else gets in this country. And of course, our parents will often let us know that they fought for this. They fought so that you, my child, can have XYZ. Our communities then look at us as, maybe you're the first one to go to university, maybe you're the first to do, get that job in town or whatever. And there's also just the other side of this expectation, this entitlement. There's the heavy weight of the expectations that we have on us to make good on the promises and the sacrifices that have been made on our behalf. But I want to start with you, my darling, right here, because I know that we've had a lot of conversations about what it is to feel that you are in some senses entitled, or rather you are very ambitious at work, and that ambition is not always met with open arms. It's sort of pushed back and say, wait your turn, you'll get there, and that often means a lot of frustration for some of us. What's your experience?
So, being young and getting into the work environment, you're always told that you have a certain limit of what you can do, what you can say, what you can suggest, right? So I just felt personally, I was like, okay, I'm being limited, not because I don't have the potential, not because I'm not doing the work, but because I am young, and because I am inexperienced, and not because I don't have the capability, but it's assumed I don't have the capability because of my age and the fact that I'm new at this job or whatever. Yeah. So that gets frustrating because firstly, I was just like, you don't know my life. Because what if I've been doing this in the background and training myself and acquiring the skills to do this? So, but then I had a conversation with my father, and my father was like, well, you can't be entitled. You can't. And I was like, but Daddy, you don't understand. He's like, no. I worked in an environment where I could do the job, but I didn't have the title. And I had to work my butt off to get that recognition. So then now I'm conflicted between, do I deserve it? And am I feeling like I'm entitled to it? So yes, and now I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, maybe I have a bit of self-entitlement, which I think everyone in general has. It's not necessarily us, the Gen Y generation. I think everybody feels self-entitled to stuff, especially when you work hard. Yeah. But also there's just, there are certain stripes you need to earn to get to certain places.
But I mean, let's talk about when entitlement is a good thing. Sabia?
To Ponta's point, I think we are all entitled, right? People who've been here for much longer than I have been feel entitled purely because they've been here much longer. And for me, that's not a good enough reason to say your entitlement is more valuable or more worthy than what mine is, right? But I do think entitlement can be very positive. Again, I think it's very important that you back it up though. But when you don't have cheerleaders around you, when you don't have grandparents and aunts and uncles that tell you you're great, and you actually have the proof that you are you're amidst greatness because they've got all these businesses, or they run these companies, or they've got the PhDs, etc. When you don't come from that background, you do need something to push you, and sometimes faking it till you make it actually is worthwhile. So sure, you're entitled to do so. Just make sure you can actually back that up. But often we're not given the opportunity to back that up because, as Bonta is saying, you're written off because you're 25, because you don't have the right surname, you didn't go to the right institution, or you didn't go to any institution at all, and you're already written off based on all of that. And I do think people who do that, and often it's older folk, and someday I'll get there as well, and I'll probably be that person, I think they have their own insecurities. At 25, I wasn't as bold, I wasn't as confident to think that I can be a CEO, start my own company, be on radio. How dare this child think that they can do it? It took me 20 years to be in this position. How dare she think she can do it in less than a year or however long it is? So I do think you have to consider all of the factors at play, but I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with being entitled if you are given the opportunity to back it up and you actually step up to the plate.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure.
I tend to feel the word entitlement is a bit problematic. I think its origins come from, post-apartheid South Africa, giving back what's due to the people, associations around land. But I feel it really comes from a sense of, victimhood. So it's entitlement, word entitlement itself speaks to victims of constraint, right? The people who didn't have land and are now entitled to it.
Sure.
The people who didn't have space and are now entitled to it. And I feel we need to consider, the bipolar characteristic of post-apartheid South Africa. We are bipolar. You have our parents who, were entitled to land, entitled deeds, and entitlement has that sense that character to them, right? It's of justice and redress and re-grabbing. Entitlement to us means I see 20-year-olds in corporate South Africa walking in on a graduate program saying I want to be a CEO next year. How do you comfort those expectations? How do you comfort those expectations? But how do you not constrain the latitude of who they could be and embrace that level of positive entitlement? It is a problematic word, I think, in South Africa itself. I think opportunity is a more refreshing term that we all understand that South African government is talking about. We're talking job opportunities, right? It's not really jobs. What does opportunity mean? How do we tackle the word opportunity, and how do we use our opportunities and be proud of them?
But what about the weight of the expectation? Because I think for many of us, there's always, in my household, I know my parents have always told me that your role is to now do better than we did. We came from a background where we herded cattle, and look at now where we are. We have our degrees, we've done well for ourselves, we've been able to send you to good schools. Now your job is to go a level up, right? And do you think that's empowering, or it can be quite disempowering?
Well, I think, just to go back, excuse me, to this point Lucy was making, and as someone who's in their 30s and kind of at the midway point, and I was that 22-year-old, fresh-eyed, bushy-tailed, I think that you're quite right. There's a difference between opportunity, which we all deserve, regardless of who we are, where we come from, and entitlement. And I think one of the things that we often don't recognize when we go into these type of corporate environments is that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. There are skills and institutional memory and perspective that you have by virtue of time passing, but what you've been involved in over that time. And I see it a lot in my own workplace, where we have young people come in and they're all enthusiastic and great, they want to do this, that, and the other. But because they haven't necessarily had the experience, not to say they don't have the potential, they don't know how to look out for the various pitfalls and the like. And so I think it's kind of what someone mentioned last week. I think it might have been you, Ponzo, when you said someone told you they've been working their whole lives to become an overnight success. And so I think sometimes we conflate what we see as someone, boom, waking up and they have this job, and we think about how hard we work. oftentimes we don't recognize the work and the extraordinary effort that other people put in, and that sometimes we've just been outmatched. And so I think opportunity is the thing that we are entitled to, but an attitude of entitlement is fundamentally problematic because no one owes you anything. But I think coming to the weight of expectation, and again, I certainly think it's a global phenomenon in terms of young people today, but I think our parents do have real expectations because they really did invest in us. But if you talk to your parents, what they see as you succeeding and living a good life is probably very different than you guys, right? Because we've seen the Kardashians, the this, the that. So we expect to have a Bentley. Your parents mean you pay the bond, you take your kids to good schools, you're able to assist them in retirement, right? And so even the sense of achievement is something that we need to be careful to define. And I think again, if you look at your parents, they're not expecting you to have made it by 28. But they're saying by the time you retire, you must not be trying to find 1,000 rands to whatever. You know what I mean? So I think there's that contradiction.
And I think that's so right in terms of just what are the markers of success when you've had the entitlement, the expectation, because I think often for me, I feel like as soon as I came out of varsity, I should have been now buying my parents' cars, and you know that's the kind of thing that you have, these unrealistic expectations of yourself. And I think as well, there's also then the list culture that we have, the awards culture, so it's top 200 this, top 200 whatever. Mark Zuckerberg at 20 already was a billionaire. And then you start feeling like, what have I done? And I think that's when it almost becomes quite suffocating for us that there's so much expectation, both in the South African context and in the global context.
I struggle though with, I hear what everyone's saying about this opportunity, right? Give folk a chance. But you cannot put me as a university graduate, right, who's been to relatively okay schools, and somebody who's been to township schools all their lives with the same age, you say, yes, they're starting off at the same place. Let's see what both
that's what anyone is saying. I don't think that's what anyone is
saying.
saying.
But at the point at which people are saying, but hang on, give me extra training, give me equipment, you know, help me catch up. People are then saying that child is entitled. And I think that's where the problem is.
But let me tell you the flip side. And I actually had someone say this to me who clearly required training and extra assistance. And what they said verbatim was, you can't train someone to listen. So they were on their own tip, going to do their own thing. And I think it's very rare where you actually proactively say, hey, I need training or assistance in something. And people are like, no, we're not going to provide you that. What I often see is the opposite, where people are like, how dare you say I need training. That's true. Do you know what I mean? And part of what a marker of success is being teachable. So even I myself, right? Even yesterday I was like, I didn't do that thing well this week. What can I proactively do to, do you know what I mean? And so while I hear you, I think it is very rare that you have a workplace say, no, we're not going to give you training.
That's true.
I've never actually come across that. Ever,
that's true.
Anywhere.
I think, you know what, and just again, closing this conversation, a lot of it is that we agree that a little bit of entitlement is good because it gives you that urge to sort of have a lot more ambition and not just settle for less. But I think it's also just important to balance it off with the consciousness, and of course also to make sure that you've got the right markers of success, the right standards, because I think if we're all thinking entitlement to Kim Kardashian's house or wardrobe, then maybe it is misplaced. You don't want to see that.
I'm Lucy Balimba. I am totally in love with current affairs, politics, socioeconomic rights, and socioeconomic policy. I'm a woman, a black one. And I love meaningful conversations, I love words, I love life.